Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another amazing episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Audrey Cavenecia. If this is your first time joining us, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. Audrey is the Chief Content Officer, the co-host alongside NFL coach Pete Carroll for the Amplify Voices podcast. And she also hosts the Unlikely podcast on leadership. Audrey has decades of experience in leadership development, entertainment production, and content marketing with the focus on championing humanity in all people. On today's podcast, Audrey and I really gets into the subject of leadership and how it impacts where people are honored to follow you. Audrey has such amazing energy and compassion for great leadership. Please help me welcome Audrey with Impactful Leadership. This is Cedric Francis, and you're listening to Lead to Greatness.
My name is Audrey Cavenecia, and currently right now I am the Chief Content Officer and producer and also host of Pete Carroll's media company. And it's a little interesting because I'm sure when people hear Pete Carroll, if you're familiar with who he is, he's a legendary coach of the Seahawks and USC. You think I'm running a sports media company, but I'm not. It's actually all dedicated to amplifying diverse voices. So we produce podcasts, and just recently we won a prestigious award. So we're now an award-winning podcast company.
Wow, we're here listening to Lead to Greatness. We have a award winner for podcast interviewing today. This is so awesome. So how does that feel?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's this part of the ego that works that's like, I want something, I want that goal, I want that success, I want that, that dollar amount to look in my bank account and see that I want to win that award. And when you get it, you're like, oh, is that it? I want the next thing. I want the next thing. Wow. But in my spirit, in my soul, I feel so rewarded because Pete and I sat down and talked about creating a platform that can leverage in any way possible his platform, my creative talents, and start really going after not only inclusive conversations, which is why our podcast is called Conversations from the Heart, because we could have talked about anything, how to be more competitive, how to whatever. And we were like, no, we're going to talk to just different people, really successful, unknown, this gamut and this array of people. And we're just going to say, hey, what's on your heart? And so, to look at my team, which is about 80% African-American and various other BIPOC representations, and to look at our guests and to look at our podcast that we're producing, I'm so proud of the Black and Brown representation. Pete is like beyond moved and so proud by it that we can do this. So to go back to your question, what do I think of, how do I feel about winning that award? It means everything to me because this is the time. This is the time when, I was doing something else for running a media company. And when George Floyd was murdered, I had always been a stand in my crews, with my content, all of it, always a stand for diversity. But when George Floyd was murdered, I was like, oh, no. I have to do more. My whole company has to be about that. Wow. And so Pete Carroll accepted the challenge and was like, yeah, let's do this. And so to win, it means that it really, for me, that award is to the voices like Resma Menachem, who wrote My Grandmother's Hands, who's doing incredible work about somatic healing, and other podcast hosts we have. We're really happy about it.
This is amazing. What have you learned from this? Did you ever feel that you would get here? What was the vision behind it? Where you at? And even talking a little bit about where you're going.
You asked, did I think that this is where I'd be and this is what I'd be doing? I wanted to be here. But because, and I'm sure many people feel this way, not just because of the color of our skin or how we look, but from maybe we were a little bit chubby kids, or, we had a list, or whatever it was growing up, where you had that pivotal moment in your life where you were like, oh, I'm perceived as less than? I didn't even know that. I was just a little kid, fully self-expressed, loving life, running as fast as I could, laughing and enjoying, uh, just wanting love and feeling so connected to the universe, to the unknown, to spirit, to soul. And then just that moment, that defining moment of being like, oh, I'm not accepted.
Mm.
So that carried, like for many of us, it carried more of a chip on my shoulder to prove that here was this woman of color who, yes, I'm a woman and I want to be competitive and I want to be in those boardrooms and I want those positions. And
Right.
yes, I look the way that I do and you overlook me. And to know, to have gone through where I've come out on this other end of having worked and been mentored by George Lucas's producing partner, Lucasfilm, have worked with one of the foremost billionaires in the world, Larry Ellison, and launched an island,
Yeah.
and to have done the array of things I've done, and now working with Pete Carroll, I'm so humbled, and I think that's the biggest lesson to answer your question. What's the biggest lesson that I've learned to date, sitting on this side, is this: I'll never prove to anyone that I am worthy. The only person who needs to state that is me. I am worthy because I say so, not because of any achievement, not
Yeah.
because of anybody I'm working with, not because of what's in my bank account, because I say so.
Yeah.
And there is I feel an ownership of that, to choose being alive, to say, I wasn't just born, I choose to be here
Yeah.
and serve my purpose. And at the same time, the other thing I learned is to be humble about it, that no success grants bad behavior or grants now you relating to other people like you're better than them. Like when I just went through that whole road of trying to prove I was better than. So it's a heavy load to put down, to stop trying to prove something to people and to yourself, and just play full out, because whether you believe in God or the universe, we've all uniquely been given this very, very, very unique set of circumstances. Even if we kind of look similar to one another, we're not internally. We're a unique vessel. And embracing that and giving the freedom to that, and being willing to say when you are in pain, when you are hurt, when you need support, when you can't see your way through, and to be able to lean and trust on somebody else. I hope that by the time I leave this planet, I would have returned to that little girl that was just running and free and never thought about anything else but that she was included and wanted.
So I want to talk about that little girl because you mentioned a chip on your shoulder. And I want to
Mm.
I want to go backwards a little bit because we're kind of talking about your success, but I don't want to do a disservice to the audience. Talking about, that era the hurt or feeling less than. I want to talk about not the feeling, but what got you there and how do you got out of
Oh my goodness. How long is this podcast?
it?
So much work. I think that, there's something very, very profound about the practice of being present.
Mm,
Because when you're truly present, you're not reacting to the past.
mm,
And that
yeah,
takes practice. It's like a muscle that, you can't lift that, deadlift that 500 pounds. But if you practice a little bit, a little bit, a little bit over time, maybe in a few years, maybe in a year, you're like profoundly blown away by, I can't believe I can lift that much weight.
yeah,
And it's the same thing. People, I know we talk about meditation and we talk about being able to just get up and walk away from situations, to just allow the brain to expand. And it took me a long time. I would say that it wasn't until really my 40s. And not everybody has to take that long. I'm that chip on my shoulder made me very rebellious and stubborn.
yeah,
That's the way I thought I could survive rejection.
yeah,
but but practicing it, taking courses, watching and really observing other people's behavior, where I could see that they had a sense of freedom, and reading about them and practicing what they did, really, really, really giving into faith.
yeah.
It seems like an for some people that are religious, they're like, of course I have faith. But to me, I think faith is uh, very much the grandest opportunity of trust
Mm,
that you can give, that the outcome will be in service of everyone, including yourself. And that's really important. I would definitely say that I didn't start practicing and learning until my early 20s, starting to see that if I continued down a road where I was just gonna be loud and aggressive and continue to be that way, I would become a shell of a person no matter what I succeeded at.
Yeah. And I want you to talk about your pivoting moment.
Probably around my early 30s, where I was in a leadership training organization, and my whole focus was about getting ahead, getting more, getting to be the best.
Uh,
And I did everything possible night and day to be able to reach that goal. And I had this, mostly I had men that were, I mean, I was in a predominantly male environment. I mean, some of these were like former Navy SEAL guys who are now
uh,
like training people that were just, can you imagine that? I mean, being
oh
trained by
man.
former Navy SEAL guys who
Yeah.
bring that kind of training into leadership, and you're getting
Absolutely.
brutally beat
Oh
down.
man.
And I was one of the few women, but there was this woman who neither her nor I seemed to care for one another. But she took on her accountability, and I took on, my striving and learning. And I had been just knocking it out of the park with the seminars that I led, with the trainings that I did, with the teams. I just kept really, really fast, being like the youngest who ever did this, the youngest at time who ever did that. And she came to me one time and she said, "Okay, great, Audrey. So you're a rock star, but
Mm,
can you create other rock stars?"
wow.
And I thought to myself, why?
Yeah.
Why would I want to do that? The whole point of being competitive is to win and be the best. I don't have any interest in having other people be better than me.
Yeah.
That seems completely, antithetical to the purpose of success. But but again, that chip on my shoulder was like anytime somebody gave me a challenge, I was like, without any thought, just reacting
Rip
to,
it.
oh yeah, 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 I'm gonna take it on. I'm gonna
Yeah,
take that
yeah,
on, right?
yeah.
And it truly was the first time it changed the trajectory of my interest, first and
Mm,
foremost. And also, it was the first time where I really felt like I had to really, really take off that fake mask,
mm,
that huge chip off my shoulder,
wow.
to really see who people were, to take the worst failing people as well, who had been like failing for years and nobody could do anything about them, and
Yeah.
take them on and have them be great as themselves, not be little me's, but as themselves.
Yeah.
It was the greatest training and challenge, especially for that time. And I would say it really saved my life in many ways and my experience of life, because everything after that I took on was about other people.
Wow. The chip on your shoulder, and now you're getting to developing leaders. What characteristics, values, qualities do you believe every great leader should have?
I think one of the most important things, or two of the most important things that I would say that a leader should have, is vulnerability
Mm,
and resilience. There was this really great book. If anybody ever wants to read it on Amazon, you can get it. It's a little tiny thin book, and it's called Mastery by, I believe, George Leonard. And one of the best books I've ever read on leadership. And one of the things that it breaks down different distinctions and different spaces that you go through if you live a life of mastery, which is essentially him talking about is inside of leadership. And one of the things he talks about was, as someone who's living a life of mastery, you have to come to peace with plateaus, because the experience is, I'm losing, I'm winning, I'm losing, I'm winning. So it seems very kind of bipolar, up, down, up, down, up, down, right? But actually, if you think about it, the longest amount of time that we spend is in the unknown, where
mm,
something's not really popping off, where we're not getting the results that we want, and if you don't have resilience, you cannot develop that profound relationship with boredom, with rejection, with the results not happening, with potentially investing everything that you have and getting down to the last $5 in your account, but
yeah.
believing in yourself in this anyway. Like, these are all the things that leaders talk about after they've made it and been like, "Oh yeah, I started off and I was so broken." They're like, "Yeah, but why don't you share that story along the way?" So
Yeah.
resilience is really, really important. Don't quit. Don't quit. I remember one time when I was working on the island for Larry Ellison, and he participates in so many things like the BNP tennis tournament, and getting Serena Williams back involved in really getting up underneath her. I was actually at his home when he was on a call with her, when he talked to her about participating in the BNP, which he purchased, the BNP tennis tournament. And then also America's Cup, he started sailing the Oracle. And I texted him, I said, oh, congratulations. And he said, Audrey, it's amazing what can happen when you never, ever, 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 ever give up. Yes, he texted that many evers,
Wow.
but you could look at somebody like him and you get it. And the other part of that, of the vulnerability, the humility, that piece, I know that for myself, that was truly hard to get, because as a woman of color, or any type of, like we talked about, any type of incident we've been through where we feel like we have to fight to have our voices heard, we have to fight for recognition, we have to fight for credit being taken away from us. These kind of experiences that some of us all kind of have this nod together. We know, like when you take on a job, especially a leadership one, you have to work 10 times harder, you have to know 10 times more.
Yeah.
For that, it was difficult for me to understand what humility meant, because how can I be my own lion and roar and
Mm,
still be the little kitten at the same time?
love it.
And I just didn't understand vulnerability. So that was a really, really big thing. And what's so important about vulnerability in leadership and success is you're not always in a successful place. It's malleable. There's always an ever-changing landscape. You don't know that person you're talking to today could be a future investor tomorrow. We see young people now popping off and being billionaires at like 23. You have no idea
Yeah.
who you're talking to at any moment of time. And the other part is, when you're leading teams, the most important thing in successfully leading a team is that they trust you.
Mm,
And nobody trusts somebody who doesn't reveal themselves, who
mm,
isn't fully there as a human being. Because we've all seen how it works when you're just an aggressive, yelling, fear based leader. Sure,
mm.
people will do what you say, but they don't have any room for innovation. And
Yeah.
actually, science has proven with studies that when people feel that fight or flight, that sense of fear coming up, it shuts off the parts of our brain that are innovative and creative,
Mm.
because we're trying to survive the situation. We don't want to raise any more, especially in the United States, but definitely in the world. We don't need any more people to be trained to fear us,
Yeah.
to do what we say. We need innovation in every form and color and size, coming from every human being. Like, how can you look at what's going on and come up with solutions that we haven't thought of? So, to me, the only access to that is being a vulnerable, humble leader while still being that lion and being able to roar.
That is awesome. I want you to just take a minute or so. I want you to speak to that individual. That's someone that's listening right now that is on the verge of quitting. I mean, they've been
Mm.
going and they've been knocked down and through COVID and through vaccinations and all these different things that's going on. It seems like they're losing and they want to give up. They want to throw the towel. The reward is on the other side of the wall and they can't see it. What would you say to that person?
You know, it's interesting because our mind is a very, very, very powerful home that we
Mm,
carry on our shoulders.
yes.
And when we're challenged, our mind says no, because it's afraid. It doesn't want to be in the unknown. It is in our best interest, however constraining it is, because it's saying to you, it's not safe there. I've never been there, or you've been hurt before. Don't go there. It's about practice. It's about the saying, how do you eat an elephant? Well, one bite at a time, because something overwhelming can only be accomplished in small steps of active choice. It
Yes.
is a choice to stay in the game when you feel your mind taking over and telling you this will never happen. And on top of it, the other piece of that that I think is so important is our mind is also like a lighthouse. If you allow yourself in fact, and I'll say it this way because you probably never hear it this way, but if you allow yourself the luxury of self criticism and doubt, and you don't practice the faith that this will be because
Mhm.
I said so. It may not be in your time, it may not be the way that you want. And the reason why is not because it's hanging out trying to torture you,
Mm.
it's because there are some lessons for you to learn along the way before you receive what it is that you're looking for. Don't be so quick to put on that doubt and those horse blinders and think, well, I did those 10 things and I don't have the result. Because what we forget, we are not human doings, we are human beings. And
Mm.
there is perhaps something that is a blind spot to you in who you are being that is not allowing you to be the container to receive this gift.
Mm. Mm.
So you must do everything possible to fight for your own self.
Ah,
Reach out to people and ask them, is there something I have not learned that you see in me? Reach out to mentors that can support you in taking you that next step.
ah,
Go and do prayer, do clearing space rituals if you need to. There's so much power in writing down your doubts and burning them or flushing them down the toilet or throwing them in the ocean and saying,
ah.
I release, I release. And if you have to do the release 100 times, then at 101, you will receive that gift.
Yes. Wow, that is a load of knowledge bombs. Wow, that is amazing. Amazing, amazing. I love it. And the audience is definitely going to be better because of that awesome, amazing advice that you just gave to us. I really want to get into Amplify Voices.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. What inspired you to begin that journey and why?
Oh, that's so perfect because it really stands on the shoulders of what I talked about when we talked about that key incident that took us on different trajectories.
Mhm.
And I had stated how mine took me to care more about people and to be about them, which doesn't not include me. When you're about people, I'm a person, so I'm in that group too, right?
Yeah.
But Amplify Voices became a real opportunity for me because so many people think that opening your heart and sharing yourself and being vulnerable and speaking your fearful truth and storytelling are all sort of fluffy things. And then being a competitive winner is another space. And to me, when I found out who Pete Carroll was and what his background was, that here was a man who had uniquely coached in a way where he never compromised his humanity, where he always spoke his truth, where he looked at team members as their purposeful human beings. And not everything turned out great, obviously, but his true purpose was to treat people as their purpose. And not only that, but he was a white man who was in a multi-billion dollar industry
Mm.
who's worked with predominantly Black men.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
that's a rare thing. You're not going to find too many CEOs that or leaders in multi-billion dollar organizations who says, oh, the majority of the people on our employment are Black men. No, that's
Right.
a
That's
very
absolutely.
rare
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And then the third thing that was really important that really intrigued me was that that he was amongst in the industry in sport. It is so cutting edge. There is no second place in the NFL.
Mm.
You win or we hate you. That's
Mhm.
it.
That's true.
Those are your options.
Yeah.
So how could I'm intrigued? How could somebody who's a white male who didn't grow up with, Black people in his family or anybody who'd married into the family, how did he manage to not only be a white male deeply invested in humanity, but be in the most cutting throat competitive industry and not have relinquished his humanity? They
Mm.
just recently did a Harvard study on his leadership style because we're at a point in history where bad behavior has been forgiven so much because
Yeah.
people produce results,
Yeah.
and it's now bankrupt. It is a bankrupt way to be as a leader.
Wow.
And they're looking for how do we model ourselves after somebody that's proven a high competitive edge in a multi-billion dollar industry while still being inclusive and about people of color and about amplifying voices.
Yeah.
And so I thought, wow, the world needs more stories like this. We need more people to be able to get up underneath this. You'll find a lot of organizations and companies and that'll say, oh, diversity. But in the background, when you pull back the curtain, they're not anything about diversity.
Yeah.
They're just saying that to get people off their back. And when I met Pete, he was who he is through and through. I really feel that he is an important part to play. And my being biracial and growing up in that world, I feel like part of my purpose is to be a bridge between the races, between whiteness and what that is for people to feel like they can have white people to have these kind of conversations. And so when I talked to Pete about this idea, he came up with the name of the company. He was like, I love this. This is everything, that I wanted to continue to invest in, now coming at this tail part of his career. And we both agreed, that it was about humanity. I mean, he had already had a career and has a career in sports. Why do we need to extend that? We wanted to do something about humanity. He wanted to exclusively do something about Black lives, but we really just kind of mixed it into this sort of melange of people and purpose. So we started off with podcasts because our intention was to do documentaries and TV series and all that. But we started off with podcasts because we felt like podcast was a narrative storytelling medium that was the greatest possible thing to your well-being, because you're not tethered to a screen. You're not, have to sit in front of your TV or your laptop after being on Zoom calls all day and all kinds of things that people have to do. You can play with your children and listen to a podcast. You could take a walk and listen to a podcast. You could take a nap. You could take a bath. You could take a shower. You can, run through the street, whatever it is. And to me, that is a tool that we have used, Cedric and myself and those of us that podcast. We have a tool to have an impact, to be just like you said, to that person who's thinking of quitting right now, who's taking a walk. Turn on a podcast, turn on Cedric's podcast, turn on Amplify Voices, and we will hold you through this space. I think podcasts are incredibly powerful. And I will say, before launching this company, we just launched it this year, and we came out with our first podcast in June of this year, that it really was about authentically embracing podcasting and not having it be an agenda, like podcasts are hot, so I think I'll do a podcast. There's no real heart in that.
Wow. What have you learned from his leadership? What has his leadership taught you?
Wow. Okay. So I'll give you an example of one of the moments in being around Pete and talking to Pete. There was this person that I was doing some work, one of the, like an executive that I was doing some work with to support one of the companies that Pete was invested in. And I had an issue with this person. And I wanted to, one of the things when you're trained a lot in leadership, it's a double-edged sword, because you also have the power to just tear somebody down effectively when you're angry, if you're not responsible for it, because you know how to get in somebody's head. And I was in that space. I was like, well, I'm about to talk to this person. And so I let him have it. And I sent Pete a message. He was like, how's it going? Have you talked to them? And I said, oh, no, but I'm about to have a conversation with them. And he said to me, he just sent me a very simple text. And he said, Audrey, as long as what you say is from your heart, you can never go wrong.
Wow.
And I was just like, okay, well, that changed what I was going to say, because I was definitely not going to be coming from my heart. I was about to come from my head with all the knowledge that I learned of what I was going to do and say. And that is who he is. I have been around, like I said, some of the greatest leaders. I've trained leaders around the world because I have this unique background of leadership training, and then also the entertainment business. And now I kind of function from that hybrid of experience. And I've never met anyone that is so thoroughly themselves. And what was also interesting is my son is now a cameraman, and he's on the team. He's the associate creative director and also our camera person. And so when he came out, having his own experience, here he is, this Black man in the world, and having been around so many different leaders because of the things that I've done. And I thought, I wonder how he's going to experience Pete, just kind of knowing about it from the sports field. And he sat down with me one day, and I said, how's it working with Pete? And he was like, that man, he's like a saint.
Wow.
He's like a saint. He was like, he is exactly who he says he is. I'm in 53, so I've been around, okay? And to say that you've meet somebody who practices what they say, and not to say that Pete doesn't make mistakes or say things that, where him and I don't disagree, but he will walk away from situations where we disagree, and he'll come back and he'll say, okay, I've been thinking about this for 4 days. What I came to, I'm just like, that was just one little interaction between you and me. Like, you don't need to do that. You're running an NFL team. Oh, no. He takes that very seriously. If he said anything that leaves another person left with that he wasn't listening or he didn't get them, he will work that and process that through. I also, again, it goes back to this competitiveness and quitting. I don't know what that must take to have people be so angry with you that you've lost their game, for the people that are fans of that football team. you've lost their game. And then after you lose, when you're so angry and you're so upset, to be asked them to go in public and do a press conference to talk about losing. But I know that how fast Pete processes information, because we once had this in May, we started to do interviews, right? So we had a Forbes interview, we had some other interviews that were set up. And Pete would call me after every interview or every kind of conversation that we had. And he was like, hey, how'd you think that went? What'd you think about that? And he would always do that. And finally, one time he told me, I think it was like after the fifth, sixth time, he goes, hey, I just want you to know that when I'm with my assistant coaches and when I'm, on the field, I always grab the team and I always process what happened so that I could be fully accountable and fully have my hands around and be responsible for what happened. Because I'm doing that with you. I want, you're my team, you're my person. So I'm calling you afterwards so that I can really, really own what worked, what didn't work, what I can do better. And to be like, this man, I mean, has been around so long and still with me, a brand new person. He hasn't, has known me like less than a year. And this is how he treats me. Be treating people, you know what I mean? That's like serious, right?
I want to talk about that because leaders don't really understand this. I want to talk about, because you're talking about Pete and his leadership, but what I want to talk about is how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel seen and respected.
Mm.
That you don't need to know me and see my performance over 5 or 10 years. You trusted me with something, and he's not working with me. He's not calling me after and goes, okay, Audrey, let me give you a critique of what you did right. And so I can coach you. Like, never. He's calling me so he can own his part. Like, what? Right?
Wow, amazing.
Imagine, just think, everybody, like being that kind of person for your team and what that would mean to them. But also think of any job that you might have right now, your listeners and where they're at, and think and knowing the feeling of somebody who doesn't see you, who doesn't listen to your input as important. And that's not the space that I live in. Him and his wife send acknowledgments to me and the team to say they're proud. They reach out to say, how can we support you? It's incredible. This is why I say I get on the call with you and you say, how am I doing? I say blessed.
Yeah.
Because all I can do with this is try to ensure that this comes out with the podcast that I produce and the work that we do. Can we extend this experience of Pete into our work so other people feel that way? That's important.
But who are some of your great role models?
This is an interesting question because I don't have role models. And
Mm.
I do that intentionally because and maybe it's because I have a very naturally am constituted or have put myself together in survival to be a very intense person.
Mhm.
So when I noticed that when I would have role models, when I would look up to people, I would start to invalidate myself instead
Mhm.
of truly owning them, that I would start to compare myself. Like, what age were they when they accomplished that? And, oh, look at how they handle that. That's so much better. I know role models are about learning from people, but unless I'm in like Pete is right there with me, I can truly learn from him. He can teach things and leave pieces of his legacy in me and the team. That's different because I'm not comparing myself to Pete. I'm just wide open to be developed and expanded and being in this space of discovery. But I tend to just, I love some things that people say, and I don't like some of their behavior, in the world. There's been people that I had looked up as role models and found out what was really going on in the background. And it's not that, like, cancel culture. It's not that I'm like, I don't honor and respect your work anymore. It's just that more and more you just see leaders are human. They're just human. And you shouldn't really look up. Like, Pete will 100 tell you, please don't look up to me. Please don't look up to me. I don't want any part of that. And he doesn't even consider himself a leader. He's like, I have no answers. I only have experiences. I'm happy to share them with you. The most important thing I could do is to lift you up to whatever you're going to accomplish, because I'm living my best life and I want you to live your best life. And that's it. I remember one time he was talking to me and he said, people mistake, like many people, they mistake my kindness for weakness, but my kindness is a choice. Just like I think, Jesus washed the feet of
Yeah.
people. And that's something, like he said, I take that as something to apply to myself and how I treat people. There's never a moment where I can't kneel down and wash the feet. And I'm like, come on, Pete, please.
How,
You better preach.
how does this feel? I mean, it's so you say your son worked for the company, right?
Yeah, he works with us.
Well, I mean, just think. I mean, you're a mother, and we're always concerned about our children, and for your
Hmm.
child to be set up in an environment like this, to even
Yeah.
surpass where you are right now, how does that feel?
It feels so incredible. And especially, and I'll just say this, as a woman who has had the privilege and pain of raising a Black man, I'm sorry, but I know he's a grown man. He's 30 now. So at this point, it's like crazy for me to think this way. But in reality, this is the reality we deal with. But I prefer to keep my son close,
Mm,
to know that he is an environment that is respecting
yeah.
who he is as a man, who is not diminishing him for his color. I couldn't imagine a better environment than the one we're in now. And I only hope that this is one day an environment where he will stand on the foundation of this in his leadership and who he is, whether he starts his own company or he becomes a director or whatever he chooses to do with this. And he will take away treating people like this, that this is really what leadership is. It means the world to me. And it's also something that's very natural in this environment that we're in with Amplify Voices as a company, because Pete worked with both his boys. We're still with one, but worked with both his boys in the coaching arena. And then his daughter has worked in a previous company and then was part of this company.
Um,
And so he knows what that feels like. And he knows what it feels like to want to keep your children with you and rise them up and play with them together and learn from them as much as be there for them. And like Pete says, that in his heart, heart, he's just a father. It's who he is. He's fathering his team, he's fathering his family. Now he's fathering, Amplify Voices.
uh,
And I'm empowered by that, because I think the ultimate gift that as leaders we can give is that, can we treat the people in our employ? Can we treat the people as we grow as a company? Can you treat them as well as you would treat your own children and care for them as well?
how has failure shaped you as a leader?
Oh, well, first of all, with the chip on my shoulder, it was always the fear of failing and
Uh,
then forcing myself to keep stepping outside myself to win. But one of the greatest things I can say now, where where failure has shaped me, is the belief and the context I come from, which is, I don't fail, I only learn.
yes.
And therefore,
Yes.
I'm happy to throw
Yes.
myself in uncomfortable situations because I will learn something. It goes back to work, right? I'm not defined by whether I won that award or not, or whether I got that amount or not, or whether the company worked or not. I'm not defined by that, but I am developed by it.
Mm.
I will look at it just like Pete did when I was telling him. Pete goes and he calculates everything, goes through and goes, okay, I can own that. Here's what I took away from that. And I will be better next time.
Uh,
I think that's the important part. And especially since as leaders, you'll spend the majority of your time in failure.
mm,
So
mm,
you want to create a profound relationship that causes you to rise up and be empowered. And yes, I'll shed tears and frustration and all of it, but okay, what can I learn from that? That's the greatest thing. Because I feel like that's all we're here to do anyway, is to experience the grandest possible expression of
mm.
ourselves.
Oh, that is a knowledge bomb. Wow, this is man, this is Audrey. This is such an amazing interview. You're definitely kicking out knowledge and experience and things that can help take us to the next level. And even some things for, I think this is a good moment for leaders to hit pause, just kind of really think about this podcast and then come go back and listen to it again, because I mean, you just are saturated the interview with so much knowledge and unspoken, or what we call servant leadership.
Hmm.
And what are some growth tips, tools, advice that you can share with the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
I think it goes back to practice. I think everybody wants that big answer that's going to set them free. That's going to all of a sudden, it doesn't work like that. It
Yeah.
really comes down to micro practices. And so, for some people, like, look, Cedric, I can ask probably like 99.9% of people, what is your purpose in life? And they would be able to answer that. Well, I like this and this, I want to do this, and I want to make this. I'm like, that's not a purpose. Those are things that you want, those are goals. Your purpose is not your goals. And when people have their clear purpose in mind, that's when they know what their truth is. And nothing can shake you from your truth.
Yeah.
Nothing. As long as you're telling the truth, you are free. And truth, that takes practice. That little ways that you could set yourself free. And especially for those of us, which I think is everybody, but for those of us who were taunted as children, who were shut down and told we weren't enough to speak up. I mean, so many people even relate to children as seen and not heard. And there's so many layers to what has suppressed us as human beings.
Yeah.
It's hard to speak your truth.
Yeah.
It is tough. And you have to want that freedom so bad that you're willing every moment of every day to say, in this interaction right now, somebody just walked past me. I held the door open for them. They didn't even say thank you. That affects you. You walk by. I make sure I stop and go, excuse me, sir, you're welcome. I will speak and not antagonistically. And believe me, there's times that it has been antagonistic and I've taken responsibility for that. But I look for the little moments where I can speak my truth. So practice. Believe me. This is why I say to leaders in my podcast, I have Amplify Voices podcast with Pete Carroll, which you could find, but I also have mine called Unlikely Leadership, because I want to expand what it is to lead. I want to talk about these things that you don't hear, not this fake it till you make it stuff. No. Tell your truth. And it really is about living into this moment. You don't need confidence to lead. You only need to practice telling your truth. And one day you will find yourself confident.
Yes.
So I say that, and there's so much information now, Ms. Cedric. You can so many books you can read and all of that. I mean, I just Google whatever you want. But I will tell you, for those of us like yourself, Cedric, and for myself and Pete, that really want people to see the vulnerability, the humility, the truth telling, and all of that, the stuff that we don't hear about leading. Your employees don't work for you. They are trusting in you. And that's an honor. And that's a gift. Nice. And every day I fail at that. Every day I fail it after decades. And being somebody who's trained thousands of leaders around the world, I still fail at that every day to ensure that I am honoring the trust they're giving me. But I catch myself because I look for it. And then I clean that up, or I acknowledge somebody, or I give my team an opportunity to say, hey, what do you need to say? Because I feel this space is kind of suppressed. And they're like, well, you kind of changed. You start getting kind of aggressive about, and I'm like, okay, I hear you. Okay. Yeah. I work at a really fast pace. I consume a lot of information in a short period of time. And I know not everybody's going to work that way. I have to have empathy and compassion and be invested in finding out how they do their best work. That takes me having my eyes open and my heart open. So I would say that's really important, Cedric.
Wow. Knowledge bomb to go. Audrey, if someone wanted to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Oh, well, very, very, very easy to go to amplifyvoices.io. We're on social media and Amplify Voices for the podcast. It's on iTunes and Spotify and everywhere. Also, my Instagram is Unlikely Podcast with Audrey on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on my name, Audrey Cavenecia. I mean, you can find me anywhere, but you could go through that website and find it. And I'm really an open, accessible person. So you're welcome to have my email address, which is audrey@petecarroll.com.
Audrey, on behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Thank you. And it was my pleasure. So thank you for sharing your gift and your heart with people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And don't forget to subscribe to Lead to Greatness if this is your first time. And if this podcast was helpful to you, leave a big thumbs up. And also, I want you to check out our Marriage Coach podcast, the podcast with my wife and I. If you're on iTunes, please rate this podcast and leave a review and help get the word out. Again, thank you, Lead to Greatness Nation, for joining us on today. Looking forward to seeing you again on next week. Till then, remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace. We out.